Stop talking. You're being detained.
I'm active duty. This is a military hospital.
Turn and face the wall.
I didn't consent to any search.
Donovan, hold up. Something's not adding up.
I found it under his seat.
A uniformed Army medic was handcuffed outside a military hospital while trying to report for duty. The officer who arrested him had no idea that the Pentagon was already watching, that federal investigators had been tracking a pattern, and that this single incident would trigger charges carrying 68 years in prison. What happened in those 11 minutes would expose a network of corruption so deep that it reached into 3 police departments, involved falsified reports going back 7 years, and ultimately required intervention from the Department of Defense itself. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hayes was 29 years old and had served in the Army for 8 years. He specialized in emergency trauma care and had completed 2 deployments, one to Afghanistan and one to Iraq. He held certifications in advanced cardiac life support, tactical combat casualty care, and pediatric emergency medicine. On the morning of September 14th, he was wearing his full Army combat uniform, driving to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, where he worked in the emergency department. Jordan had left his apartment at 6:45 in the morning. His shift started at 7:30. The drive normally took 20 minutes, but he always left early because military punctuality wasn't a suggestion. He was driving a Honda Civic, 3 years old, properly registered, with current tags and insurance. He wasn't speeding. He used his turn signals. He stopped completely at stop signs. He was doing absolutely nothing wrong. At 7:02, he was pulled over by Officer Keith Donovan of the Montgomery County Police Department. Donovan activated his lights on a residential street about 2 miles from the hospital. Jordan pulled over immediately, put the car in park, turned off the engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they were visible. This was standard procedure that every service member learned. Comply, stay calm, document everything. Donovan approached the driver's side window. Jordan kept his hands visible and waited for instructions before moving. "License and registration," Donovan said. Jordan spoke clearly. "Officer, I'm reaching for my wallet now. It's in my right cargo pocket. I'm moving slowly." He retrieved his military ID and driver's license. He opened the glove compartment slowly and retrieved the registration and insurance documents. He handed everything to Donovan through the window. Donovan looked at the military ID. He looked at Jordan's uniform. He looked at the registration. Then he walked back to his patrol car without saying anything. Jordan sat perfectly still, hands back on the steering wheel. He checked the time, 7:06. He was going to be late for his shift if this took much longer. After 4 minutes, Donovan returned to the window. "Step out of the vehicle." Jordan's training kicked in. "Officer, can you tell me why I'm being pulled over?" "Just step out of the vehicle, sir." Jordan complied. He opened the door slowly, stepped out, and stood next to the car with his hands visible. Donovan was looking at him with an expression that Jordan had seen before. Suspicion mixed with something else. Hostility, maybe, or contempt. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." "Officer, I need to get to the hospital. I'm due on shift in 20 minutes. I'm a medic at Walter Reed. I haven't done anything wrong. Can you please tell me what this is about?" Donovan's hand moved to his service weapon. He didn't draw it, but the message was clear. "I'm not going to ask again. Turn around and put your hands on the vehicle." Jordan turned around. He placed his hands flat on the roof of his car. He felt Donovan pat him down aggressively, checking for weapons. The pat-down was thorough and unnecessary. Jordan wasn't reaching for anything. He wasn't making sudden movements. He was in full military uniform at 7 in the morning on his way to work at a federal military hospital. "Where are you coming from?" "Home." "Where's home?" "Silver Spring." "What were you doing there?" "Sleeping." "I live there." "Where are you going?" "Walter Reed." "I'm a medic. I work in the emergency department. My shift starts in 15 minutes. Donovan stepped back. "Stay here." He walked back to his patrol car again. Jordan looked at his watch. 7:14. He was officially going to be late. He pulled out his phone with slow, deliberate movements and texted his supervisor. "Pulled over on Rockville Pike. Officer won't explain why. Going to be late. Sorry." His supervisor, a senior medic named Lieutenant Ava Richardson, responded immediately. Are you okay? What's happening? Don't know. He stopped me 2 miles from the hospital. Won't say why. Been here 12 minutes. I'm in uniform. Richardson's response came fast. Stay calm. Document everything. I'm making calls. Jordan didn't know what that meant, but he trusted her. Richardson had been in the Army for 14 years. She knew how things worked. Donovan returned to Jordan's car. He was holding something in his hand. A small plastic bag. He held it up. What's this? Jordan looked at it. He had never seen it before in his life. I don't know what that is. It's not mine. It was under your seat. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen that before. You're telling me this isn't yours? I'm telling you I've never seen that before. That's not mine. Whatever it is, it didn't come from my car. The bag contained a white powder. Jordan's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what was happening. He had heard stories from other service members, other black men in uniform who had been stopped and suddenly had drugs appear in their vehicles. Stories that sounded too calculated to be coincidence. You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. Officer, that's not mine. I don't use drugs. I'm subject to random urinalysis. I get tested constantly. The Army tests me. That's not mine. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Jordan's mind was racing. If he resisted, even verbally, it would escalate. If he complied, he'd be arrested for something he didn't do. Either way, his career could be destroyed. Random drug tests were mandatory in the military. He had passed every single one for 8 years. But an arrest, even a false arrest, could trigger an investigation. It could delay his security clearance renewal. It could damage his reputation. I need to call my command. You can call from the station. I need to call now. I'm active duty military. I have rights under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This is unlawful. Turn around now or you'll be charged with resisting arrest too. Jordan made a decision. He turned around. He put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. They were too tight. He felt the metal cutting into his wrists. He didn't say anything. Donovan walked him to the patrol car and put him in the back seat. The plastic seat was hard. The car smelled like old fast food and sweat. Jordan sat perfectly still. His mind was working through the legal implications, the chain of command notifications, the statements he'd need to make. What Jordan didn't know was that Lieutenant Richardson had made 3 phone calls in the time he'd been detained. The first call went to the hospital's military police liaison. The second went to the base legal office. The third went to a number she wasn't supposed to have but had been given 6 months earlier by someone at the Pentagon. Someone who had told her that if anything unusual ever happened to any of her medics, anything that felt wrong, she should call immediately. Richardson made that call at 7:19. By 7:22, federal investigators were already mobilizing. Because Jordan Hayes wasn't the first. He was the 7th uniformed service member pulled over by Montgomery County Police in the past 18 months under nearly identical circumstances. Early morning, close to Walter Reed, vague traffic stop, alleged drugs found in the vehicle. The pattern had been noticed. The Pentagon had been watching. Jordan sat in that patrol car for 47 minutes before anything else happened. No explanation. No Miranda rights. Just silence and the hum of the engine keeping the air conditioning running. He watched through the window as Donovan stood outside talking on his phone. The officer kept glancing back at the patrol car, checking to make sure Jordan was still there. Where would he go? He was handcuffed in a locked vehicle. At 8:06, a second patrol car pulled up, then a third. Jordan counted 5 officers now standing in a cluster near the front of his Camry. They were talking, gesturing. Something had changed. He could see it in their body language. One of the new officers walked to the patrol car and opened the door. Different face, older, gray hair at the temples, sergeant's stripes on his uniform. Staff Sergeant Hayes? The officer's tone was completely different from Donovan's. Respectful, almost careful. Yes, I'm Sergeant Pierce. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here this morning. I'd like to answer them, but I'd also like to know why I'm sitting in handcuffs for something that isn't mine. We're looking into that right now. Can you tell me where you were coming from? My apartment in Silver Spring. I'm stationed at Walter Reed. I'm an emergency medic. What time did you leave your apartment? About 6:45. My shift starts at 7:30. Pierce wrote something in a small notebook. Did you make any stops between your apartment and here? No. Straight drive. Did you allow anyone else to drive your vehicle last night? No. It was parked at my apartment complex all night. Pierce nodded slowly. And the substance officer Donovan says he found in your vehicle, you're stating you've never seen it before? I've never seen it before. I don't use drugs. I'm subject to random testing. I was tested 2 weeks ago, passed like I always do. Pierce looked back at the other officers, then back at Jordan. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to be direct with you. Something about this situation doesn't add up. We're reviewing everything right now. Does that mean you're going to uncuff me? Not yet, but we're working on it. Pierce walked back to the other officers. More talking, more phone calls. Jordan watched a black SUV pull up at 8:19. Federal plates. 2 people got out wearing suits, not police uniforms. Suits. The woman was black, mid-40s, carrying a leather briefcase. The man was white, younger, with the kind of haircut that said military or federal agent. They walked directly to the cluster of officers and flashed credentials. The entire dynamic shifted immediately. The Montgomery County officers went from relaxed to rigid. Backs straight, hands away from their duty belts. The posture of people who suddenly realized they were being evaluated. The woman in the suit walked to the patrol car and opened the door. Staff Sergeant Jordan Hayes? Yes, ma'am. I'm Special Agent Reeves with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. This is Special Agent Kowalski. We're here because your commanding officer reported a potential civil rights violation. Jordan felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the first indication that someone was paying attention. Can you tell us what happened this morning? Jordan walked them through everything. The traffic stop with no explanation. The refusal to provide a reason. The search without consent. The bag of white powder that appeared from under his seat. The arrest. Reeves took notes on a tablet. When Jordan finished, she looked at Kowalski. He nodded slightly. Some kind of silent communication between partners who had worked together long enough to not need words. Staff Sergeant Hayes, we're going to get you out of those handcuffs, but I need you to stay here for a few more minutes while we sort something out. Is that acceptable? Yes, ma'am. Reeves walked back to the officers. Jordan couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see it. Reeves was talking. The Montgomery County officers were listening with expressions that ranged from defensive to worried. Donovan looked sick. At 8:31, Sergeant Pierce returned to the patrol car with a handcuff key. He unlocked Jordan's cuffs without a word. Jordan rubbed his wrists, red marks where the metal had been too tight. You're free to go, Pierce said. No charges are being filed. What about the substance in my car? That's being handled by federal investigators now. You'll need to speak with them about evidence and chain of custody. So I can leave? You can leave. Your vehicle is being processed as part of an investigation, so you'll need to arrange other transportation. We'll have it returned to you within 48 hours. Jordan got out of the patrol car. His legs were stiff from sitting in the same position for almost an hour. He walked to where Reeves and Kowalski were standing. Staff Sergeant, you're not under arrest. You're not being charged with anything, but we do need you to come to our office to make a formal statement. Can you do that this morning? Yes, ma'am. Do I need an attorney? That's your right, but you're not a suspect. You're a victim. We're investigating the officers, not you. Still, if you want representation present, that's completely within your rights. I'll come now. I don't need an attorney for the truth. Reeves drove. Jordan sat in the back of the federal SUV, which was significantly more comfortable than the patrol car had been. Kowalski turned around from the passenger seat. We've been watching this unit for 6 months. Your case is the 7th incident involving service members being stopped under questionable circumstances near Walter Reed. Always early morning. Always claims of traffic violations that don't hold up. Always searches that produce drugs. 7? Jordan felt his anger rising again. 7 people, and you're just now doing something about it? We've been building a case. The first 3 victims didn't want to press charges. They were scared of retaliation. The 4th and 5th recanted their statements. The 6th, was transferred overseas before we could complete the investigation. You're the first one who has everything we need, clear timeline, security footage from your apartment showing your car parked there all night, command structure that backed you immediately. And most importantly, you didn't consent to the search. Jordan looked out the window at the highway passing by. How many people consented because they didn't know they could say no? Most of them, Reeves said quietly. That's how it works. People see a badge and think they have to comply with everything. But you knew better. The DCIS office was in a nondescript building in downtown Washington. Jordan gave his statement in a conference room with a recording device on the table. He went through everything again, this time with more detail. Times, exact words, observations about Donovan's behavior. The statement took 90 minutes. When it was finished, Kowalski left the room and returned with a folder. He laid out several photographs on the table. Do you recognize any of these individuals? Jordan looked at the photos. 5 different people, 4 men, 1 woman, all in civilian clothes, all black or Latino. I don't know any of these people. These are the other service members who were stopped under similar circumstances. Different officers conducted the stops, but they all worked in the same unit, same patrol zone, same shift rotation. Reeves pulled out another photo. This one showed a police officer Jordan didn't recognize, Sergeant Vance Greer. He runs the unit. We believe he's been coordinating these stops as part of a quota system. Officers under his command have been planting evidence to boost their arrest numbers. Why target military personnel? Kowalski answered that one. Because you're disciplined. You follow orders. You don't typically have criminal records. You're less likely to fight back legally because you're worried about your careers and security clearances. You're perfect victims for statistics that look good on paper. Jordan felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't random. This wasn't one bad officer having a bad day. This was systematic, organized, deliberate. How long has this been happening? We don't know yet. We've traced it back 18 months, but it could be longer. We're still pulling records. What happens now? Now we finish the investigation. We'll need you to testify when this goes to trial. Both criminal trial for the officers involved and likely civil proceedings. Are you willing to do that? Absolutely. Reeves stood up. We'll be in touch. In the meantime, don't discuss this with anyone except your commanding officer and military legal counsel. This is an active federal investigation. Jordan left the building at 11:17. He called an Uber and went back to his apartment. His car was still impounded as evidence. His morning had been completely derailed. He was exhausted from being awake since 5 a.m. and the adrenaline crash that followed the arrest. He sat on his couch and tried to process what had just happened. 7 people, maybe more, all targeted because they wore the uniform, all stopped by officers who were supposed to serve and protect. His phone buzzed. Text from Lieutenant Richardson. Checking in. You okay? Status? Jordan typed back. Home. Gave statement to DCIS. Not charged. Car impounded. More to follow. 3 dots appeared immediately. Richardson was typing. Good. Take the rest of the day. Report tomorrow for debrief. Command is aware. You did everything right. Jordan set his phone down. He should sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop running through the morning. Every detail, every word, every moment where things could have gone differently. What he didn't know was that at that exact moment, federal agents were executing search warrants at the homes of 4 Montgomery County police officers. They were seizing computers, phones, documents. They were building a case that would eventually expose one of the most systematic evidence-planting schemes in Maryland law enforcement history. The search warrants hit at 6 in the morning, 2 days after Jordan gave his statement. Sergeant Vance Greer was eating breakfast when federal agents knocked on his door. He opened it holding a coffee mug. 20 minutes later, he was in handcuffs watching agents carry boxes out of his home office. Officer Kyle Brennan was at the gym. Agents waited in the parking lot. Officer Todd Ramsey was already at the station starting his shift when Internal Affairs walked him out in front of his entire squad. Officer Jennifer Cho was dropping her kids at school. The look on her face when agents approached her minivan would later be described by witnesses as complete shock. By noon, 4 officers were in custody. By 2 in the afternoon, the story broke on local news. Montgomery County police officers arrested in evidence-planting scheme. The headlines spread fast. Jordan was back at Walter Reed when his phone started blowing up. Texts from other service members, friends asking if he'd seen the news. A reporter somehow got his number and left 3 voicemails before he blocked it. Lieutenant Richardson called him directly. Conference room. 20 minutes. Jordan walked into a room with 5 other people. 2 he recognized from the DCIS meeting. 3 were JAG officers he'd never met. Everyone looked serious. The lead JAG officer was a colonel named Victoria Paul. She had the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without realizing it. "Sergeant Hayes, you're aware of the arrests this morning?" "Yes, ma'am." Paul slid a folder across the table. "This is what we know so far. Vance Greer ran a unit of 12 officers. 4 have been arrested. 3 more are under investigation. The remaining 5 are being interviewed as potential witnesses. What did they find in the searches?" "Spreadsheets. Greer kept detailed records of every planted stop, target profiles, demographics, success rates. He treated it like a performance metric system." Jordan felt his jaw tighten. "Performance metrics for ruining lives." Pohl continued. "The spreadsheets show 37 documented stops over 18 months. Military personnel made up 22 of those stops. The pattern is clear. Greer specifically targeted service members because you're statistically less likely to have drugs in your vehicles, which made the planted evidence more believable. Clean records, security clearances, no prior arrests, perfect targets." One of the DCIS agents spoke up. "We've identified 28 victims so far. 9 haven't come forward yet. We're working on locating them." "What about the drugs they planted?" Jordan asked. "Where did they get them?" "Evidence room. Greer had access as a supervisor. He was checking out seized narcotics under false case numbers, then never returning them. The audit trail shows systematic theft going back at least 2 years. 2 years. Jordan tried to imagine how many people had been caught in this, how many lives destroyed, how many careers ended, how many security clearances revoked. Pohl pulled out another document. "Here's what happens next. The federal prosecutor is building RICO charges, racketeering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, evidence tampering. The charges are extensive. Will they testify against each other?" Brennan already has. He flipped within 6 hours of arrest. He's providing detailed testimony about how the system worked. Who knew what? Who participated? Who looked the other way? And Greer? Lawyered up immediately. Hasn't said a word, but we don't need his confession. We have the spreadsheets. We have Brennan's testimony. We have video evidence from multiple stops. We have the drugs traced back to the evidence room. The case is solid. Jordan nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Your testimony. Criminal trial first, then likely multiple civil suits. The other victims are organizing a class action lawsuit against the county. You'll probably be asked to join. I will." Pohl leaned forward slightly. "I need you to understand something, Sergeant. This is going to be public. Your name will be in court documents. Reporters will want interviews. Defense attorneys will try to discredit you. They'll dig into your background, your service record, everything. It won't be easy. I understand, ma'am, but if I don't testify, they might get away with it. Other people might not come forward, so I'll do whatever it takes." Pohl smiled slightly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. They walked through timelines, evidence, potential testimony questions. By the time Jordan left, his head was swimming with information. He went back to his desk and tried to focus on work. Impossible. His mind kept returning to those spreadsheets. 37 documented stops. How many undocumented ones? How many people were sitting in jail right now because of planted evidence? His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Is this Sergeant Jordan Hayes?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "My name is Marcus Okonkwo. I'm a Marine stationed at Quantico. I saw your name in the news reports about the Montgomery County arrests. I think the same thing happened to me." Jordan sat up straighter. "Tell me what happened." Okonkwo's story was nearly identical. Pulled over for a minor traffic violation. Officer seemed aggressive from the start. Searched the vehicle. Found cocaine in the trunk. arrested, charged. But Okonkwo had fought it. He'd hired an attorney who demanded dashcam footage. The footage showed the officer's hand movements during the search didn't match his written report. The charges were eventually dismissed, but Okonkwo's security clearance was suspended for 8 months. His career progression stalled. He'd been fighting to get his clearance reinstated ever since. "When was this?" Jordan asked. 14 months ago. "Do you remember the officer's name?" "Ramsey." "Officer Todd Ramsey, one of the arrested officers." "I know. I saw his photo this morning. That's why I'm calling. I want back in. I want to testify. I want my clearance reinstated. I want everyone to know I was telling the truth." Jordan took down Okonkwo's information and promised to pass it to the federal investigators. After he hung up, he sat staring at his phone. 14 months. Okonkwo had been fighting this alone for 14 months, while the scheme continued, while more people were targeted, while Greer and his unit kept planting evidence and destroying lives. Over the next week, Jordan received 9 more calls, all service members, all similar stories. Some had been convicted and served time, some were still fighting their cases, some had given up and accepted plea deals just to make it stop. Each call made Jordan angrier. Each story added another layer to the scope of what Greer had built. This wasn't 4 officers making bad decisions. This was an organized criminal enterprise operating inside a police department. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Jordan was subpoenaed to testify. So were 15 other victims. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the back rows. Family members of the accused officers sat on one side. Victims and their supporters sat on the other. Jordan watched Greer walk in wearing a suit instead of a uniform. He looked smaller somehow, less threatening. Just a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a tired expression. Hard to believe this person had orchestrated something so calculated and cruel. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. The spreadsheets were entered as evidence, projected on screens for everyone to see. Columns for target demographics, success rates, notes about which types of vehicles were easiest to search, comments about military personnel being ideal targets because they wouldn't fight back. Jordan testified on day 3. He walked through the entire stop, every detail, every moment. The prosecutor asked him about his military service, his security clearance, his clean record, then asked him to describe what it felt like to be arrested for something he didn't do. I felt helpless. I knew I was innocent, but I also knew that didn't matter in that moment. The officer had a badge and authority. I had nothing except my word, and my word wasn't enough. The defense attorney cross-examined him aggressively, tried to suggest Jordan might have been carrying drugs without knowing it. Maybe someone else used his vehicle. Maybe he was covering for a friend. Jordan stayed calm, answered every question directly, never got defensive, never got angry, just stated facts. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict came back unanimous. Guilty on all counts for all 4 officers. Sentencing wouldn't happen for another 2 months, but the message was clear. The system had failed, but accountability was possible. Sentencing day arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. The courtroom filled early. Victims who had testified sat together in the front rows. Jordan sat between Marcus Okonkwo, whose security clearance had finally been reinstated, and a woman named Diana Chen, who had lost her nursing job after Greer's unit arrested her on fabricated charges. Judge Catherine Braddock entered. She was in her late 50s, known for thorough sentencing hearings and detailed written opinions. She didn't rush. She reviewed each defendant individually, going through their records, their roles in the scheme, the specific victims they had targeted. Officer Todd Ramsey was sentenced first. 23 years federal prison. No possibility of parole for the first 15. The courtroom was silent except for quiet crying from Ramsey's family section. Officer Kevin Lawson received 19 years. Officer Daniel Foster received 21 years. Each sentence came with detailed explanations. Judge Braddock cited specific cases, specific victims, specific lies documented in the spreadsheets. Then came Greer. Judge Braddock looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Sergeant Greer, You created and supervised a criminal organization that operated under the cover of law enforcement authority. You targeted vulnerable populations specifically because you believed they couldn't fight back. You destroyed careers, families, and lives. You betrayed every principle of justice and public service. You weaponized the badge. This court sentences you to 34 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for the first 25 years. Greer's face didn't change. He just nodded slightly, as if he had expected exactly that outcome. Jordan watched him being led away in handcuffs and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no relief, just emptiness where all the stress and fear had been. The civil lawsuits came next. Jordan's attorney filed a comprehensive federal civil rights action: excessive force, false arrest, malicious prosecution, conspiracy to violate civil rights, failure to train and supervise, municipal liability. The complaint was 47 pages and named both the individual officers and the city. 23 other victims filed similar suits. The city's legal department looked at the criminal convictions, the documented evidence, the spreadsheets showing premeditation and planning. They knew they couldn't win at trial. Settlement negotiations began 6 weeks after sentencing. The city's opening position was insulting. Low amounts, no admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality requirements. Jordan's attorney rejected it immediately. The city came back with better offers. Still not enough. The negotiations stretched across 4 months. Finally, the city made their final offer: individual settlements ranging from $75,000 to $350,000 depending on the severity of harm, no confidentiality requirements, public acknowledgement that the victims had been wrongfully targeted, agreement to implement specific departmental reforms. Jordan's settlement was $275,000. He didn't celebrate when he signed the papers. The money didn't erase what happened, didn't give him back the months of stress, didn't undo the damage to his trust in police, but it was acknowledgement, official recognition that he had been wronged. That mattered more than the amount. The departmental reforms were extensive: federal monitoring for 5 years, complete overhaul of the internal affairs process, mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off, public database of all stops and searches with demographic data, civilian review board with actual authority, regular audits by external agencies. Any officer with a pattern of questionable searches would be flagged automatically. Jordan used part of his settlement to finish his degree. He graduated with honors 18 months after the arrests. His security clearance was fully reinstated. He received job offers from 3 defense contractors and 2 private aerospace companies. He took a position with a firm developing satellite systems, good pay, interesting work, normal life. But something had changed. He couldn't see police the same way. When he got pulled over for a broken taillight 6 months after starting his new job, his heart rate spiked immediately. His hands shook when he reached for his license. The officer was professional and courteous, just wrote a warning and sent Jordan on his way. But Jordan sat in his car for 10 minutes afterward, trying to calm down. He started attending a support group for people who had experienced police misconduct. Listened to their stories, shared his own, found some comfort in knowing he wasn't alone in how the experience had affected him. One woman talked about having panic attacks whenever she saw a patrol car. A man described losing his marriage because he couldn't move past the anger. Another woman said she had moved to a different state entirely just to feel safe. Jordan stayed in the group for 8 months. Eventually, the panic lessened. He could drive without constantly checking his mirrors for police, could go about his day without that low-level anxiety humming in the background. But he never forgot, never let his guard down completely. Marcus Okonkwo became an advocate. He testified before the state legislature about how easily security clearances could be weaponized against service members, pushed for reforms in how military personnel were treated in the civilian justice system, got several bills passed requiring additional oversight when service members were arrested. Diana Chen, the nurse who lost her job, was rehired by her hospital with back pay and a formal apology. She became part of the Civilian Review Board created by the settlement agreement. reviewed complaints against officers, pushed for accountability when the department tried to protect problematic cops. The 4 convicted officers filed appeals. All were denied. Greer tried twice more, both denied. They're currently serving their sentences at different federal facilities. Earliest possible release for Greer would be at age 67. The others aren't much better off. 3 other officers who had been part of the unit but weren't charged criminally were fired administratively. The department's investigation found they had known what was happening and failed to report it. Not enough evidence for criminal prosecution, but enough to end their careers. The new police chief gave a public address 6 months after the sentencing, acknowledged the department's failures, promised transparency and accountability, talked about rebuilding trust. Jordan watched it on the news and felt skeptical. Words were easy. Sustained change was hard. Jordan's case proved that documentation and federal oversight could break through systemic corruption. His decision to stand firm that morning, to trust his instincts and refuse consent, created the opening that investigators needed. Without his clarity and the institutional backing from Walter Reed, the scheme might have continued for years. The settlements didn't erase the trauma, but they forced acknowledgement. Real reform takes generations, not months, and trust once broken doesn't rebuild on promises alone. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.